We have one briefing item. The briefing items are intended for the staff to provide updates and or get direction from the Board of Mesa County Commissioners on day-to-day business. Public comment will not be taken during this time of the agenda. We do have a briefing on Mesa County's proposed fiscal budget 2025 for the budget. And we do have Diane, our budget manager here, and also Pete here to present. Good morning, guys.
Good morning.
And just as a note, we're not taking action on this. The board isn't taking action on this today. We'll be just getting a budget presentation from our staff, and we'll be making final budget decisions in the next couple months. So just to clarify.
Morning, Madam Chair and board members. Today, it's our honor to prepare and present the 2025 proposed budget. Just a reminder, this is a proposed budget and briefing as mentioned. From now till December 10th, we have the finalization of the budget. We have the opportunity for folks to come in and make requests. But I will say, as always, recently we have been using a budget review team that consisted of members from our Sheriff's Department, our Clerk and Recorder, Department of Human Services, CJSD, I'm going to miss a Health Department, and probably missing one or two, Public Works and others. So our larger departments, we get together. As always in any budget, the initial requests are higher than what we have to spend. So we go through and identify those pieces. So this proposal will show you what we're proposing and how it meets and works into some of our strategic plan goals. So in our first slide, we are talking about how our budget meets our strategic plan goals. And we have of course, again, our strategic initiatives are build the best team, build a culture of excellence, build community together, and build fiscal stability. Just a shout out to all those that worked on the strategic plan. This is the first strategic plan in my 28.5 years here that we continue to go back to. We continue to enhance it. And we continue to get things completed under the strategic plan initiatives and working forward. And we really take it to heart, particularly in our budgeting. So our first item under build the best team, we are proposing a 4.2 million increase in compensation. That's across all funds. That's not just general fund, which of course is about half our folks in there. That includes a 3% step increase, and it includes money for the departments up to 2% of their budget to look at merit increases based on their analysis of their employees moving forward and their performance reviews. We're including an additional $1 million for sheriff deputies to enhance public safety. And of course, that meets a number of things of building community together and culture of excellence, and fits well within what we're doing. So $2.5 million to renovate the Mesa County Justice Center. I should say that's in addition to the roughly $3.5 million we spent this year. That will continue to enhance, add new courtrooms, and help us get out of the backlog and other components going on there. And also, our DA space is very, very crowded. This will allow them to be in a much professional sort of office space that will help them do their job much more efficiently. So I mentioned the workday system, a lot of work. Again, shout out to the employees that are working very hard on making sure that this budget includes continuation of that. We had expenses this year and some expenses next year. Again, as I said, the transparency that this will allow for all those folks that are users and our public, it can't be understated. And the fact that it ties together basically 31 different funds that the county has, where we'll be able to look at those as a holistic approach, much more so than our current aging system. Our current aging system is over 20 years old and has some limitations compared to what we would like to do with it now. So about 600,000 in energy savings, as the board is well aware. We did an energy efficiency study, and we came up with a plan to convert many of our buildings and make them much more energy efficient. And we are in the midst of implementing that. And that kind of self-funds based on the savings that we have through that program. So, and there's some guaranteed savings by the folks that helped us do the study. And then, again, can't be understated. I hope everybody in the public gets a chance to go out and see the community centers, community halls. Clifton campus is just amazing. To think that 2 years ago, there was nothing there. We were just turning ground. to what we have there now, and we continue to enhance and work on that. And we'll talk a little bit about the capital part of this, where we're continuing to put some capital improvements in and around that campus. But even the DeBeck one, any of the community halls that have gone up, and what this is the cost to help support and maintain those. As already mentioned by Commissioner Rowland, there's many events going on out there, and we'll continue to see that success in building of those events there. So.
Right. Thank you, Pete. Good morning, Commissioners. Diane Dziewatkoski, County Budget Manager. Here I have for you some high-level gross figures for the 2025 proposed budget, and this includes all funds. And what we're doing is we are looking at 2025 proposed and comparing it to the 2024 adopted budget. And so starting with our revenues in 2025, we are expecting about $246.9 million in revenues for the year, and that's a $5.2 million increase versus 2024, which equates to about a 2.2% increase year over year. Some of the big factors that affect our revenues, of course, is our property tax revenues. We had an increase in our assessed values last year. This year in our preliminary numbers, it looks like our assessed values are relatively flat for the year. And in December, we expect to get those final certified values from our assessor's office. So we will have a more concrete number for our property tax revenues in the adopted budget. So right now, we really just have a forecasted number in here based on what those preliminary assessed values are. Another big factor for our revenues is our sales tax revenues, and we really look to 2024 year-to-date collections as a way to sort of forecast what we expect 2025 to look like. In the past few years, our sales tax revenues have really sort of plateaued at about a 2 or 3% increase year over year. And so this 2% increase is really what we're looking at year-to-date 2024, and we're using that to forecast that out for 2025. Moving on to the expenses, $272.5 million in the 2025 proposed budget, which is a $10.2 million increase over 2024, which equates to about a 3.9% increase year over year. And two of the big cost drivers in our funds, and Pete sort of touched on this, one of them is employee compensation, $4.2 million to provide those merit increases to our employees across all funds. And that's based around that 3% average merit increase plus an additional 2% on top of it. In addition, we're a self-insured organization, so our health insurance premiums make up a big part of our budget every year. And in the proposed budget, we have included a 10% increase in those health insurance premiums for 2025 as a preliminary forecast. And typically around this time of year, we do start to get more finalized numbers for what our health insurance premiums will look like in 2025. And in preliminary talks with our benefit consultants, it looks like the increase will be slightly higher than that. And the big driver behind that is our insurance claims from last year in 2023 were really high, and we're also running a really high usage this year in 2024. And so in the next few weeks, we look to kind of get some more final numbers. And so we will have an update on that in the adopted budget, but we do expect an increase over what we had originally forecasted in this proposed budget. And as Pete mentioned, there were a number of requests this year to either expand programs, create new programs, or add services. And unfortunately, we weren't able to include a lot of those requests in this budget. And we'll talk a little bit more about that once we move on to the general fund, because that's where most of our departments and a lot of those requests roll up into. For operating expenses, because we were expecting some large increases due to inflation or some expected increases in contracted services, we tried to keep the rest of our operating expenses relatively flat with what our 2024 adopted numbers were. And so that was sort of to minimize some of those other increases that we were seeing. And I did want to mention, we'll get to it in a different slide, but we are adding 13.25 full-time equivalents to our authorized staffing level. And some of those come with some of their own funding, whether it's state or federal grant funding or increased revenues from county activities, but we'll get into that in a later slide. I did want to mention that those are rolling up into these numbers that you're seeing here. And then I also want to call out the shortfall that you're seeing, the net change in both the 2024 adopted and the 2025 proposed budgets. You can see we have the shortfall in there. And the main driver behind that is in the capital fund. We have a large number of projects that will span across several fiscal years. And so we actually go through a process in the Q1 budget supplemental where we will roll over some of those projects into the current year budget. And I believe this year in the Q1 supplemental, we rolled over about $23 million worth. So you'll see that again in Q1 of this year as we start to finalize some of those capital projects in the remainder of this year and figure out exactly what will be rolled over into 2025.
So the 23 million was rollover from 2020.
So in Q1 of this year, we rolled over 23 million from 2023.
If I could mention, those rollovers are contingent upon the departments having a contract or purchase order completed for the funds. Any funds that are not obligated come back, and that's the board's purview to then reapply those where they see the priority.
So when we adopted 2024, I'm sorry, not adopted. When we finished 2024, we had a balance of 54.7 million in all fund balances.
That was in the adopted budget. Yeah, that was the projection.
What was the actual?
The actual is forecasted to be 63.8 right
Okay,
now.
so you jump at the ending
That's the
balance
same
from
portion,
proposed to
yeah.
63.8 to the
Yeah.
actual. And then that fund balance difference is primarily the capital that we
Mhm.
appropriated in January, February of this year. Okay,
Right.
Thank you.
And so moving on to the general fund. The general fund makes up about a third of the budget, so a lot of our budget discussions surround the general fund, as it also houses a lot of our county departments and services are funded out of it. And so you'll see a lot of large impacts to the general fund in the overall budget. In terms of revenues, we're looking at $94.9 million in 2025, which is a $6.9 million increase versus 2024, which equates to a 7.8 increase year over year. And one of the biggest components of the revenues in the general fund is those property tax revenues. The general fund receives the largest chunk of it, and based on what our current projections are looking at, this is going to be increasing by about $2.5 million year over year, pending those finalized assessed values that we will get in December. And also sales tax is a big portion of the general fund's revenues. And looking at that 2% growth factor, we are expecting about a $500,000 increase in sales tax revenues year over year. We have some other general revenue sources, interest on investments, use taxes that are increasing by about $1.5 million. And then we have some additional federal revenue replacement funds, about $2.6 million that are rolling up into this increase year over year. And this is being partially offset just by some decreases in some of the intergovernmental revenues that our departments are receiving. I did want to note that our behavioral health and our criminal justice services departments were noting that they're seeing some decreased state revenues year over year. So that is partially offsetting some of those increases. Moving on to the expenses, we're looking at $96 million in expenses in the 2025 budget, which is a $4.9 million increase versus 2024 and a 5.4% increase year over year. Again, the biggest driver behind this is that compensation package that we have for our employees. So of that $4.2 million increase, about $2 million of that is in the general fund because about half of our employees reside in the general fund. And those health insurance premiums are increasing in the general fund by about $1 million. So those are two of our biggest drivers. In addition, in terms of operating expenses, as I mentioned before, we had some increases due to inflationary pressures as well as some expected increases in some of our contracts. Some of the big ones to note is our sheriff's office had a $1.5 million increase in their inmate medical services contract, which was in the general fund. And so that was a big driver. Our RTPO Grand Valley Transit contract had an increased county share of $250,000. And we also increased our transfer to our public health department by $700,000 in order to help them maintain a healthy fund balance, and increased our transfer to our Department of Human Services by $300,000. And again, to mention the Department of Human Services, the decision to utilize some of their fund balance last year was the reason that their transfer was lower last year. So we're kind of just bringing up that transfer closer to historical levels. And in terms of other operating expenses, pretty much everything else was left at that 2024 level. In order to sort of offset some of these increases, we are proposing some cost-saving measures. The big one is a 4-month hiring freeze. The county runs at about an average 7% vacancy rate in the year. About the past 2 years, I think, has been about average 7%. And so really a 4-month hiring freeze just allows us to ensure that those positions are remaining open, and we can quantify that within our proposed budget. So it does provide us some relief for some of those other increases that we're seeing. And then just to mention the additional FTEs that we're adding 9 of those to the general fund. And I'll get into the next slide which ones are being supported by additional funding, but 9 of those are falling within the general fund.
Question. If I could talk briefly on the proposed hiring freeze, that is not all departments. We know there's some critical departments that have to have, and we have many departments that have grant funded employees, and obviously it doesn't make sense to do that. It's more targeted to those that are direct 100% paid out of the general fund for the county. And again, it's based on average vacancy. So it's not like we're asking them to hold that average vacancy that they've had throughout this year, just in order to have those funds available up front. In the long run, those funds may become available also as part of just vacancy savings, but this way it locks it up earlier in the budget process. So thank you.
Dan, real quick, again, the difference between the adopted budget and then the actual, about 1.3 million, what is that composed of? Do you know?
What is it?
The savings.
The ending balance and the beginning balance.
Oh, I see. Yeah. So what I have on here for 2024 adopted, that was the original forecasted ending balance when that budget was adopted. The reason it's now looking to be a $21.5 million beginning balance is just due to some of the looking at where we're at year to date. So that 20.2 million came when we were in 2023 adopting the budget for 2024. And now we are about 9 months into 2024, so we can better forecast what our actual ending balance is going to be based on some of those revenue projections and where we're at with our expenses.
And that was my question. Primarily, what makes up that 1.2? Is it just we underestimated the revenue for 2024, which we should do? Or was it
I think
more?
on average, we usually collect about 101% of revenues. And then we usually come in with expenses about 99% on average. So usually we do collect slightly more than we budget for, and we always come in slightly under where we budgeted.
Okay.
I look at this as a credit to our departments who are fiscally watching what their budgets are and working hard to make sure they meet the revenue goals and that their expenses goals come in close, but don't go over their expense. So
All right, so here I have for you highlighted some of the departments that are seeing a change in their staffing levels in the proposed budget. I did want to note that the current authorized staffing level that I have on here is the staffing level that was adopted in July for our Q2 supplemental, and we do plan to do another Q4 supplemental during 2024. So we do expect a few changes to the staffing level still in 2024. But I will highlight some of the changes that we have included for the 2025 budget specifically. We're looking at adding 13.25 FTE, so that's about a 1% increase in our authorized staffing level. As I mentioned, majority of these are being covered by additional funding, either in the form of state or federal funding, or by increased revenues through some of the activities that the county is doing. And so I'll just step through these line by line. Animal services. The function of animal enforcement is going to be moving out from under animal services into our sheriff's department. So we are moving 4 FTEs between the two departments. And
4 or 5?
we're moving 4. The reason that it says 5 on here is because we're making an adjustment for one FTE loan that Animal Services had from Criminal Justice Services. So there is some of those loans between the departments that.
And all 4 will be going to the sheriff's office?
So 4 are moving to the sheriff's office. Yep, so they're included in this addition on the line item for the sheriff. And I believe that's to take place in January of 2025.
correct.
Our behavioral health, they made the decision to remove one of their FTEs in order to mature 2 of the other positions that they have in their department. Our fairgrounds are adding 2 FTEs, and as Pete mentioned earlier, one of those FTEs is dedicated maintenance to the Clifton and DeBeck community centers. And the other FTE will be maintenance for the fairgrounds. And those 2 FTEs will be covered through the conservation trust funding that we receive. Finance, we are adding 1 payroll position, and this technically is going to be added in our Q4 supplemental this year, but it is included in the 2025 budget, so I wanted to show it on this slide. This payroll position is just to help support the finance department as they are increasing workload, especially due to Workday implementation, and this will just go to support some of those centralized finance functions in the county. Our Department of Human Services is adding 3 FTEs for the Workforce Center, and these positions are fully funded through federal grants. They'll be adding 2 career development case managers and 1 employment specialist. Our Public Health Department is adding 1.25 FTEs, and this is for a fully funded through state grants program, Family Connects, which focuses on resource navigation and risk assessment of families in the postpartum period. So that's fully supported through that state funding.
For the human services one, you refer to it as grants, federal grants. It's not really an application that they have to apply for continually. It's just funding coming from the feds.
Yeah.
So it would be ongoing.
Yeah.
Okay.
Our engineering department is adding 1 wastewater technician FTE. This was an employee who's been a temporary employee for several years, so they're just making the decision to move that now to a permanent position. Our stormwater division is adding a stormwater inspector, and this is expected to be covered by increased inspection revenues as the amount of inspections they're doing is increasing. Our RTPO planning division is adding 1 transportation planner FTE, and this is supported by federal grant revenues. And then our sheriff's office, as I mentioned, they are getting 4 FTEs for that animal enforcement from Animal Services Department. They will be adding 2 Colburn FTEs or 2 Colburn deputies in the Q4 supplemental this year. But I did want to include them in this count as they'll be also in the 2025 budget. And those Colburn deputies will be covered through revenue that we receive through a contract that we have with the town of Colburn.
I have a question on the Colburn issue. Colburn is paying us $350,000 for the sheriff to do that. But as I understand it, 63,000 of that 350 was pulled away from the sheriff's budget.
I haven't had a chance to talk to Diane with that yet, but we'll make sure that the whole 350 is in the budget. I believe it is. I believe part of it may have went to capital, but let me confirm that
Okay,
before we.
thank you.
And then we are also adding 3 additional deputies to the sheriff's office to make their total proposed FTE 272.5.
Those other 3 are just deputies,
Mhm.
not specific to anything. Okay.
I should mention, I think we kind of glossed over, behavioral health is 100% grant funded and continues to receive funding. So all the FTEs that are currently in there and proposed in the budget are based upon grant funding that is coming forward. And they continue to do a good job, excellent job of going out and soliciting and looking for those grants. And for the most part, this change, again, as I said, as Diane was mentioning, is right around 1% of our FTE count. The majority of these are either a transfer or have grant funding with them. There's very few requested new, with the exception of the Sheriff's Department. We continue to work with them to try to build that component up.
And one final question about animal control. It's not specific to the FTEs, I don't believe, but it sounds like the amount the sheriff requested that he needed was $44,000 short.
And yes, so we'll give a briefing on that. And
Okay.
of course, this proposed, and then we can look at the thing. And part of that has to do with, we're also evaluating the loss of revenue from our towns and what that does and how much it takes to run the shelter versus what's there for things. So suffice to say, in the scheme of the budget, we will definitely, there'll be items that we'll continue to look at and evaluate to make sure that, and of course, the next step is actually your guys' budget and your adoption. So we will work through that and work through those issues. So thank you.
Right, so moving on to our capital improvement plan. This is just a high level look at what we put together. We put together a plan for the upcoming budget year, 2025, and then 5 additional out years. So our capital plan includes 6 years. And the reason for this is just because of the nature of the projects, multi-year, multi-phase. So having a 6-year plan helps us better account for when these large cost projects are starting and ending, and it just helps for a better informed budgeting process. And I should mention that as we get closer to the end of the year, we will sort of finalize this a little bit more as some of those projects start to close out, or we know exactly what funds will be rolling over into 2025 from 2024. So this is very fluid between now and the end of the year. But right now we're looking at about 50 million in revenues in 2025. And a big portion of that comes from sales tax that we receive, about $35 million into the capital fund. And then the remainder of that is going to be other specific state or federal funding that is going towards some of these projects that we have.
If I could speak briefly, and just a couple of high level projects. We mentioned the Justice Center renovation, high community need. It's the Justice Center is very, very tight, overcrowded. We don't quite have enough courtrooms. So this will get us to that. Will also, as mentioned, get us additional space. We moved probation out this year and gave them a great space to work out of. Gives us an opportunity to repurpose some of that space for both the DA and additional courtrooms. So we'll continue working through that. We do have a grant that is not included in this budget that we are applying for. We'll see if we get that and what that leads to as far as the next thing. Road improvements, I mentioned around the Clifton campus, 32.5 road will be a corridor that will enhance and increase safety around in order to help serve that campus as it continues to get use and growth. 38 road, there's a grant on that. That is actually creates a multi-purpose road, bike ped and vehicles that serves our Orchard Mesa area and our fruit and areas up through there. And E Road, of course, is an important corridor, also known as Orchard Avenue inside the city. That's the road, or, I'm sorry, E Road is below 32. We're doing some additional work on E Road in order again to enhance that Clifton area and work some components through there. So, and then I mentioned the energy performance construction projects. Great program that will continue on. It does have some guaranteed savings in it, and those savings are come about by getting very efficient with all our buildings and looking at opportunity for savings through that. So those are some of the higher level. Of course, we have a lot of other projects continued on with road safety, and we continue on with our facilities improvements as mentioned, and we also continue on working with our criminal justice service and others, IT and others.
What is included in the miscellaneous?
So that is going to include your public safety, capital, debt service payments, those kind of things.
Thank you.
And so I guess what's next? Today, we're presenting the proposed budget for you. And after today, we'll make the budget documents available on our website for anyone from the public to view. And after today, we'll also open up our budget appeals period where departments who requested items that maybe didn't get included in the proposed budget, they can appeal directly to the board for potentially including some of those items in the final adopted budget. And we'll also finalize more of that capital improvement plan, as I mentioned, as we start to get closer to the end of the year. December 1st is when we expect to have those final assessed values from our assessor's office. We can kind of finalize what we expect to receive in property tax revenues. And then we expect to be back here on December 10th to adopt the final 2025 budget.
December.
December.
Oh, I thought you said September.
No. And so I guess, Pete, do you have anything to add?
Yeah, just, this will probably be my last budget presentation, so there you go. But no, no, I will say, thanks to the board. I think we've got a very fiscally sound plan. It continues to keep our fund balance in a reasonably healthy amount. That being said, we know that we're getting back to what I would call a more normalized budgeting process. We had a few years where we had a lot of ARPA dollars and other dollars flowing through. I think the board made some very wise decisions that are shown out in the community of what those dollars were used for. But I also think that we're getting back to a more normalized state where we have to look at where some of those programs were built up and maybe not be able to keep those at that same level. So I think it's a very good budget. I think it's fiscally conservative. At the same time, I think it continues to enhance our community and provide those services that we need for our community at a high level. And I do know there's a couple departments already that we're continuing to work with as part of the appeal process. So we'll continue to work with those departments. And of course, the board will continue to get briefings and update before the December 10th adoption. And just thanks to Diane and the budget review team, they did a huge amount of work to bring this into an order that works very good for what we're trying to do with the organization. So.
Thank you both. Commissioners, do you have any final comments or questions?
Not at this time. I don't.
Okay.
Yeah, wonderful job. Thank you both. A lot of work. I think you start like in June or July on these budgets.
Yeah.
It's a lot of work.
Few months, yeah.
Trial by fire.
Yeah.
Welcome. No, we really appreciate you guys. We appreciate the budget review team and all of our departments. It's a big lift to get this done, and we sure do appreciate you guys.